You're listening to What's Ray Saying, the podcast. This is a special episode. It's special because it marks a line of departure. In the military, a line of departure is a line on a map that defines a point at which you start your movement toward action, a change in the environment. Now, during the first 4 episodes, I had a chance to experiment with the production of the podcast, and actually I was learning on the fly by doing. But there was some really unexpected and great and immediate interest in the show that resulted in a lot of informative feedback from listeners and supporters. And some of that feedback included technical advice and suggestions like reducing the music volume and increasing the volume of the host's voice, to topical suggestions, content, suggestions that there are more personal content be added, more personal commentary, and some more current issues. And a lot of people had an interest in hearing the podcast on a more regular basis. So, based on this great listener feedback, you can expect some changes. And I'm very thankful for all of you who reached out and stuck with me, stuck with us. So you can expect the podcast to be released weekly for the next 10 weeks, or 10 more weeks of this first season. Expect the music elements to be softened. Expect a little more personal commentary from me about relevant and current topics, and we will probably remaster the first 4 episodes in a way that takes away some of those distracting elements or volumes. Or maybe I'll leave them as part of the show's archival record, allow you to bear witness to the bloody birth, cleaning, and afterbirth of the show. It's all part of life, but we'll see where the interest lies in that. So, here's the show. How much pain and hardship, crying and suffering can Black Americans take before they are moved to action? And how do they act? How long can white Americans hear those cries without responding before they are moved to action? And how do they act? And what and where is the line of departure? From the source of all Black knowledge, home in the woods enjoying my animals with very low humidity, with no shirt on, able to think about nothing but my own selfish self. But my heart is still aching with empathy for those in emotional and physical pain and agony I am powerless to relieve. You're listening to What's Ray Saying? I'm Ray Christian. Coming up, 2 narratives and a commentary.
I'm Sarah Beth Nelson, a North Carolina raconteuse and board member of the National Storytelling Network. The first time I heard Ray Christian tell a story, I was listening to the Risk podcast, live from Chapel Hill 2. His story was gritty, but funny. Then it took a dark turn, and to my surprise, I heard the audience laughing. I was in shock. Had I missed something? Had Ray made a face or a gesture that had caused them to laugh? When I finally met Ray in person, I had to know, why did they laugh? He told me, sometimes people laugh when they're uncomfortable. This is what I love about Ray's stories. They are real. Real life is often funny, often uncomfortable, and sometimes we laugh at the wrong parts. I'm glad Ray is out there telling it like it is, and now it is easier to hear Ray than ever before. Put your headphones on and let him whisper right into your eardrums as you listen to his podcast, What's Ray Saying?
Seasoning was the process of breaking a black African's will and force them to work and obey orders. This process was shorter for younger ones, but males above the age of 14 or 15 would usually require a longer process that could last a few days or weeks, depending on their level of resistance and physical conditioning. Slaves that were sick or near starvation also complied more quickly or died during the process. Seasoning began with ritual discipline, where slaves were given small tasks to perform and beaten severely for non-compliance, with each refusal resulting in more torture and death. And those white men who were well trained in the art of slave seasoning were often in great demand. Preceding generations of slaves no longer needed seasoning, as they were slaves who had never known freedom, called now Creoles, meaning they were born in America. They were different. But they too required continual maintenance in the form of both physical and psychological discipline and conditioning, in the form of fear and ignorance in a world where whites had the power of life or death over blacks. Blacks learned to smile through pain and despair, to sing and to dance at their master's whim, regardless of any emotional stress. It was commonly believed that blacks were depressed because they suffered from some type of disease, drapetomania, the desire to run away. It was believed that a severe beating and reducing a slave back to an infantile state was a cure for this condition. Certainly not freedom. In response, slaves routinely sabotaged work with slowdowns, stealing, breaking equipment, intentionally maiming animals by poisoning and cutting them. They lied. They ran away for short periods of time, despite knowing that when they were caught upon, which they most surely would be, as most slaves barely moved more than a mile from the place they were born, severe action would result. Suicide offered a way out, but direct suicide was uncommon in the black population, but melancholy and painful depression manifested itself nonetheless in reckless behavior, like running away, hiding out for just a single day to escape pain by lashing out at white people, going against the rule despite knowing the punishment would be brutal and could range from whipping to castration to death by strangulation or being burned alive. This willful disregard for life in those people who feel like there is nothing left to live for, you can see it in practice today. In the aftermath of slavery, for some whites, any and all that a black had that was more than the poorest white was an insult, especially in the South. No black discomfort was meaningful, as even the smallest annoyance of a white person in custom or practice was more important than anything of that of a black. While there were often exceptions, I'm only dealing with the common. The common attitude that blacks felt less emotional distress as whites, less physical pain, that resulted in this specific and a common minimization of black pain and emotional distress, and an attitude that remains persistent among many Americans today. In response to this known attitude and awareness of the environment, it was suggested and preached early on at historically black colleges and universities, and by many black intellectuals as part of the Tuskegee model, and advocated by Booker T. Washington, this idea that blacks should complain less about abuses, accept a certain level of hostility as normal. In response, many educated or well-informed blacks became more indifferent to the abuses of the poor until they were treated with the same level of contempt, and as always arrived at the very same question, why? With the very same answer, because you are black. Some whites abuse less, some more, but a cycle of conditioned response was created. While some blacks advocated strictly following the rules and the law of social order as a means of assimilation and happiness, but even they realized that even when these rules were followed, they could still be subjected to everyday humiliations and disrespect, regardless of their station in life. Many chose to remain isolated in the black community, while others responded by trying to assimilate and giving in to white abuse. A new generation of blacks became more resilient to white authority, more resistant, lacking the everyday influence of white supremacy, hardened by participating in 2 world wars and Vietnam. They did not have the same fear as their parents. They were more defiant to white authority. They did things their parents would not do. They asked questions, and they made demands that would scare them to death. Now, these calls for equality were seen by many whites as an insult. Why should these niggas be elevated? The white man gets no handout. Why should they be lifted, and why should the white man be brought down? This pushback against civil rights was enforced by white racists throughout the country who infiltrated or were tacitly accepted and sometimes openly recruited into law enforcement agencies, most notably throughout the South. The enforcement of Jim Crow laws was a top priority to maintain peace, stability, and enforce political and social objectives as well, to keep blacks in inferior positions throughout social life. In the years following the breaking down of Jim Crow-era laws and the massive increase in white populations that now no longer openly and in most private sectors could not openly support inequality, Americans now dismiss complaints by blacks of rough handling and verbal abuse by police, citing the numerous successes of blacks in America as examples of why it could not be happening anymore, until recordings emerged. And again, much like the Holocaust deniers, there are those who still refuse to open their minds and see. Now, if I had a sponsor or an advertiser or a paid spot or promotion, it would go right here. Example, Ray's Special Sauce. A lovely blend that adds that special something to your food and gives you a little extra after your meal. Delicious and mouth-watering. But don't take my word for it. A couple, a man and woman, the age of 75, put a small dollop on their short ribs, and 1 month later, the woman was pregnant with twins. A couple, with friends, used the sauce rather liberally and fed the bones to the dog. A few hours later, they were all naked, including the dog, in a hot tub with a monkey serving of ice chips and running towels. Ray's Special Sauce. If I had a sponsor or an advertiser, if this was a paid spot, it would go right here. End. My mama was a maid. They called it day's work where we lived in Richmond at the time. She worked about 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, cooking, hard cleaning, and babysitting for the white lady and the white man, her husband, who lived so far away you had to get on a special bus. The special bus was filled with all black women in various colors of maid uniforms. They were all over the age of 40 or so. On the ride to work, they seldom spoke to each other, only but to acknowledge each other's presence, maybe with a nod or a single word. Mama warned me more than once, don't talk while we're on the special bus. I thought at the time it had something to do with how white people acted and when they were on buses alone with each other outside the city. My mama was not the only maid who from time to time was forced to take a child with her to work when she herself had no child care and when I was too young to be left home alone. Whenever I did see another kid on the bus, we never spoke or even looked at each other more than once. I bet their mama told them the same thing. We rode the special bus outside the city where no black folks lived, grassy streets, rows of houses with trees, bushes, and even squirrels. At the house, the lady allowed me to play near my mama if I didn't distract her from her work, or I could play out in the backyard with some rules that were never really clear, like I could only use the bathroom in the house downstairs in the basement. I could never be in the room when Mama was changing the girl baby. I could never speak to other adult white people. And I couldn't sit or play on the front porch. But other than that, I was free to play. But for me, the backyard was more fascinating and fun than the alleys where we lived, filled with broken glass, trash, stray dogs, and cats. It was common for the lady and the man's kids to not be home. It seemed like they went to camps and trips a lot. They also stopped playing with toys, even when they worked. Where we lived, kids played with each other's toys, if we had any, and we played with them until they broke. And then we still played with them, broke or not. The lady and the man, they asked strange questions when Mama was not around, like, why do black people have big cars if they are poor? What does your mama buy with her money? But like Mama always told me, say I don't know to everything. Once in a while, the man would find simple tasks for me to perform, and he would give me $1. A really big deal. Cash money for a kid, paper money. But how long could it last? Wow, maybe like a month. I was a kid. How much candy? Penny candy? And I thought, man, look what people who look like the lady and the man can do. Just give a kid $1 for nothing. There were times, though, I didn't understand what the man was asking me to do. He confused me with things like, do you think all rotten apples can be picked up and put in a pile? Or, do you feel like getting some weeds out of the driveway? I would respond, no. He would look at me strangely, and later Mama would come to me and ask, boy, did the man speak to you? Yes, ma'am. Well, go do that thing he's talking about. That was confusing me even more. He asked me a question. And later I had to go tell the man I did the thing. I remember recalling him saying, and he said this more than once, oh, you're a little slow, but you can understand. That's good. And this happened on several of our interactions. Even though my mother was old enough to be the lady's mother, she would at times yell at my mama. Like when she was in a hurry, or my mother would ask her a question or couldn't understand something, or the kids were wearing something she didn't like, or had something in their lunch she didn't want them to eat. My mama would just stand there and say, yes, ma'am, yes, ma'am, yes, ma'am. But when the lady left, Mama would cry. My sisters, who were early in my life, went to work with Mama, as well as working and be recommended for a job, as from time to time you see on a special bus a black woman with a younger black woman, and you knew that was probably her daughter. But in this time, the girls that age, like my sisters, were being frustrated and put off by the degrading nature of the working. Mama having to bow down to them the way she did. And when they were old enough to say no, they stopped. The lady and her family, they complained about a lot of things I couldn't understand. Things my mama had no time to think about, like her health, schooling, why the world was so unfair, the price of their car, we didn't have a car, the Vietnam War, school integration, where they were going to go on vacations. They argued about those things. On the ride home after the special bus, and we got on the regular bus, some of the women looked depressed and drained. They weren't as pumped up or had their game face on as when we started, the beginning of the day. But some still spoke of their love for their white family, and a few would even debate with each other about the power and influence of their white family. Others would reflect on the white people's hypocrisy, the amount of disrespect they felt, how they hated each day, and how tiring it was to have on a face all day, how their feet and knees hurt, how they worried about their husband or their children. A few others would have what we call the maid dream, that one day, after years of hard and dedicated work and loyalty, working while you're sick, going out in bad weather without child care, that maybe the white family will provide for you, take care of you, leave you money. But this almost never happened. There were always rumors and myths about it. Some women got the idea early it was never going to happen. Some didn't, like my mama. 25, 35, 50 years of work for a single family, raising their children. But when they got old and too slow, they were simply fired.
Nobody's supposed to be out of my business. Nobody's supposed to be out of my business.
I have often wondered about why some people become policemen. I wonder what their true motivation to serve really is. Certainly, I want police to protect my physical and personal property. I want crimes to be investigated. And I respect the nature of the work and the responsibility that goes with it. But there are those people who should never, ever be in the service of the public with such a high degree of authority and with so little education, training, and foresight. If you are too afraid of the people you serve and your primary concern is getting home alive, with this mentality, you need a new job. I get it. It's not for everyone. Do something else. Certainly, cops are putting in the work every day. We want this. We need this. I believe it, and I know this. But on a personal level, I get stopped by police every month for nothing but questions. I have known people who were not fit for military service. We kicked them out. People who were delusional, dirtbags, people who had fantasies of killing or just wanted power over people, who were able to train and qualify as police officers. Now, those awfully stupid people, that awfully stupid person who is responsible for killing those police officers who were out there doing their job, who wanted to go home, did not do one damn thing that will forward the cause of ending police killings and abuse. In fact, they may have made it worse. It only takes a few racist or crazy, misguided person of any colors with a twisted agenda, supported by passive action in response to alleged abuse, to create a firestorm of a backlash. In response to stress, there should always be an expectation of measured response by most people. And there also should be an expectation of an unreasonable response by a few. There are some things that will explode under pressure.
Nobody's supposed to be out of my business.
So this one is done. Provide feedback. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook at What's Ray Saying and what'sraysaying.com. I need and I want to hear from you, so let me hear from you. Check out some of my stories on the Risk Podcast. A recent episode of Snap Judgment is called Grits and Sausages. A recent episode of the Martha Radio Hour. That very same story is actually also printed in the July-August edition of Reader's Digest 2016. Think a little old me in Reader's Digest. Come on. Donate to the podcast. If not you, then who will support the show? The show is produced by me, so I take full responsibility. No one needs to get hurt. With very special assistance by Dr. T, with thanks to my dear friend and storytelling colleague, Sarah Beth Nelson. The original beats used in this episode were created by the amazing Beej Gordy Brooks. I'm going to go walking. Next time.
You have been listening to What's Ray Saying, the podcast, hosted by Ray Christian. You can find What's Ray Saying on iTunes, Facebook, and Twitter. If you've got comments, questions, or feedback, you can always reach us via Facebook or by emailing what'sraysaying@gmail.com. Ray says each episode is made with love, fatback, chicken feed, and fresh mountain spring water, but none of these are legal tender according to the electric company. To help this listener-supported podcast pay the bills and keep producing episodes like the one you just heard, you can click on our Donate tab on Facebook or go to paypal.me/what'sraysaying. Tell a friend or 2 or 12 or 20 what you just heard on What's Ray Saying, the podcast. Until next time.